Inside the warm golden glow of the Golden Olive restaurant, a heavy porcelain plate crashes against the wall, shattering into 1,000 pieces. A man in a pristine, several $1,000 suit stands with his arm extended, face twisted in a sneer. Cowering before him are two identical twin boys, no older than 10. Their clothes ragged and dripping with rainwater. "Get out!" the man screams, his voice cutting through the polite chatter of the dinner service. "You smell like wet dogs. You are ruining my appetite." One of the boys tries to speak, holding out a dirty hand. "Please, sir, we just want—" "I don't care what you want," the man interrupts, kicking a piece of bread that had fallen from the table toward them. "Eat that and get out, before I have you thrown into the street." Cut to black. 3 hours earlier, the rain in the city was relentless. It wasn't a soft drizzle. It was a cold, punishing sheet of water that soaked through coats and chilled bones. For the man riding his bicycle through the gridlocked traffic, the rain was just another obstacle in a life full of them. He was a single father, a man whose face bore the lines of too many sleepless nights and too many double shifts. On his back was a large, square, insulated backpack with the logo of a food delivery app. It was bright orange, a stark contrast to his gray, weary existence. His legs burned with lactic acid. He had been pedaling since 6 in the morning, and it was now nearing 5 in the afternoon. His phone, mounted on the handlebars, pinged. Order complete. Earnings $3.50. He sighed, his breath forming a cloud in the cold air. $3.50 for riding 4 miles in a storm. He did the math in his head, a calculation that ran on a constant loop in his mind. Rent was due in 4 days. The electricity bill was overdue. And today was the most important day of the year. He tapped the banking app on his wet screen. The number glared back at him, $42.15. He had promised her. He had looked into his daughter's big, brown eyes this morning and promised her a birthday dinner at the Golden Olive. It was the place his late wife used to talk about, a place of magic and light that they could never afford when she was alive. Now that she was gone, the promise felt like a sacred vow. He pedaled harder, ignoring the cramps in his calves. He had to pick her up from school. When he arrived at the school gates, he saw her immediately. Katie. She was 7 years old today. She stood under the awning, clutching her worn-out backpack, wearing a coat that was slightly too small for her growing frame. When she saw him, her face lit up with a smile that could part the storm clouds. "Daddy!" she squealed, running toward him. Heedless of the rain, he dropped his bike and caught her, swinging her up into his arms. For a moment, the cold, the debt, and the hunger disappeared. There was only the smell of her strawberry shampoo and the warmth of her small arms around his neck. "Happy birthday, princess," he whispered into her hair. "Did you finish work?" she asked, pulling back to look at him. Her eyes scanned his wet uniform. "You're soaking wet, Daddy." "It's just water," he laughed. The atmosphere inside the Golden Olive was suffocating. The air smelled of truffle oil, roasted garlic, and expensive cologne. But underneath it all was the sour stench of cruelty. Mr. Sterling, the man who had just kicked the bread across the floor, was a caricature of wealth and arrogance. He was a large man, his suit straining against his bulk, his face flushed with wine and rage. "Manager," Sterling barked, snapping his fingers. "Why are these vermin still in my line of sight?" The manager, a wiry man with slicked back hair and a spine made of jelly, scurried over. He looked at the twins with unmasked disdain. "I told you two to leave," the manager hissed, grabbing one of the boys by the shoulder. The boy flinched violently, pulling away. "Don't touch my brother," the other twin said, his voice trembling but defiant. He stepped in front of his sibling. "We aren't begging. We have money. We just wanted to buy a slice of pizza." "Money?" Sterling let out a raucous laugh that echoed off the high ceilings. "Show me. Show me the fortune you carry in those rags." The brave twin reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of coins, pennies, nickels, a few quarters. He held them out. "It's $4.50. The restaurant fell silent. $4 wouldn't even buy a glass of water in this establishment. Sterling stared at the dirty coins in the boy's hand. Then, with a casual flick of his hand, he slapped the boy's wrist from below. The coins flew into the air, scattering across the marble floor with a loud, chaotic clatter. They rolled under tables, under the shiny leather shoes of the patrons. "Oops," Sterling smirked. "Looks like you're broke now. Get out." The father, standing by the entrance with Katie, felt a physical pain in his chest. He watched as the boys scrambled to their knees, frantically trying to pick up the pennies while people watched. Some diners looked away in embarrassment, but many just watched with cold indifference. "Daddy," Katie whispered, tugging on his hand. Her eyes were filled with tears. "Why is that man being so mean? Those boys are just hungry." The father looked down at his daughter. He saw the fear in her eyes. He realized that this was a teaching moment. He could teach her to keep her head down, to survive by being invisible, or he could teach her what it meant to be human. He tightened his grip on her hand. "Come on." He walked past the hostess stand, ignoring her protests. Sir, you can't just walk in there." He marched straight into the dining room. The manager was currently grabbing the boys by their collars, dragging them toward the back exit. "Let them go," the father said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was steady. The manager stopped. Sterling turned around, swirling his wine glass. He looked the father up and down, his eyes lingering on the frayed collar of his shirt and the scuffed work boots. "And who might you be?" Sterling sneered. "Another rat from the sewer. Did you come to help them pick up their pennies?" The father ignored Sterling. He looked at the manager. "I said, let them go. They are children. They are trespassing," the manager spat. "And unless you want to join them on the curb, I suggest you leave." "I'm a customer," the father said, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I'm here to have dinner with my daughter, and I am inviting these two boys to join us." The silence that followed was heavy. Sterling looked at the father, then at the terrified twins, and finally burst into laughter. You're going to feed them," Sterling mocked. "Buddy, you look like you skipped a few meals yourself. You really want to spend your whole paycheck on charity." "That's my business," the father said. He turned to the twins. "Hey, you guys hungry?" The boys looked at him with wide, disbelief-filled eyes. They looked at the angry manager, then at the kind face of the father. They nodded slowly. "Come sit with us," the father said gently. He led them to a small table in the corner, near the kitchen doors. It was the worst table in the house, but the pizza arrived 20 minutes later, steam rising from the melted mozzarella and spicy pepperoni. It was beautiful, a perfect circle of comfort in a hostile world. The waiter slammed the metal tray onto the stand and walked away without a word. The smell was intoxicating. The father felt his mouth water uncontrollably. His body was screaming for calories. He was a laborer. He burned energy all day, and he was running on empty. He needed this food. He picked up the pizza cutter and sliced it. It was a standard pie, 8 slices. He did the math instantly. 4 people, 8 slices, 2 slices each. It was fair. It was logical. "Dig in," the father said with a smile. The twins didn't wait. They grabbed a slice each, their manners forgotten in the face of starvation. They ate voraciously, cheese stringing from their lips, eyes closing in pure bliss. Katie ate hers more slowly, savoring every bite, swinging her legs under the chair. The father took a slice. He brought it to his mouth. The crust was crispy, the sauce rich and tangy. It was the best thing he had tasted in years. He finished it in 3 bites. He reached for his second slice, but then he stopped. He looked at Leo and Sam. They had already finished their first slices and were devouring their second ones. Within seconds, their plates were empty again. They looked at the pizza tray. There were 2 slices left. The father looked at Katie. She was halfway through her second slice. She would be full. But the twins, they were still eyeing the tray. They were growing boys, and they had been starving. 2 slices weren't enough to fill the hollow emptiness of hunger they had been carrying. The father looked at the slice in his hand, his second slice. Then he looked at the last slice on the tray. He felt a wave of dizziness. If he didn't eat, he would be weak. He had to work tomorrow. He had to cycle in the rain again. He needed the fuel. But they need hope more than I need fuel, he thought. Slowly, deliberately, the father put his second slice back onto the tray. "Daddy," Katie asked, pausing with a piece of pepperoni in her mouth, "aren't you hungry?" The father smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his tired eyes. "No, sweetie. I had a huge lunch at work. My boss bought us burgers. I'm actually stuffed." It was a lie, a painful lie. His stomach cramped in protest. He pushed the tray toward the twins. "You guys are still growing. You need this more than I do. Go ahead. Take the last 2 slices." The twins froze. Leo looked at the father with wide eyes. "But you only had 1. I told you. I'm full," the father insisted. "Please, don't let it go to waste." Leo and Sam looked at each other, then back at the father. Tears welled up in Sam's eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. You're really nice." They took the slices. They ate them slower this time, savoring the kindness as much as the food. At the VIP table, Mr. Sterling had been watching. He saw the father give up his food. He saw the delivery driver sipping his water to fill his empty stomach. Sterling stood up, swaying slightly from the alcohol. He grabbed a fresh bottle of expensive red wine and walked over to their table. The restaurant went quiet. Everyone sensed a confrontation. "Well, well," Sterling boomed. "Isn't this touching the martyr? The saint of the slums?" He stopped right next to the father. "I saw that. Giving up your food. You're starving, aren't you? I can see your hands shaking." The father didn't look up. "Leave us alone. You think you're better than me," Sterling hissed. "Because you struggle, because you suffer. Let me tell you something, pal. Suffering isn't noble. It's just pathetic." Sterling tilted the wine bottle. A stream of dark red liquid poured out, splashing onto the father's shoulder and running down his white shirt. "Oops," Sterling said, his voice devoid of apology. "Look at that. Now you're wet and stained. You fit right in with the trash," Katie screamed. "Stop it! Leave my daddy alone!" The twins jumped up, their fists clenched. "Don't touch him!" Leo yelled. The father slowly stood up. The wine was cold on his skin, staining the only good shirt he owned. But strangely, he didn't feel anger anymore. He felt a calm, cold clarity. He turned to face Sterling. The millionaire was taller, heavier, and backed by the power of money. The father was small, tired, and broke. But in that moment, the father looked like a giant. You think this shirt matters? The father's voice was low, but it carried a weight that silenced the room. He brushed the wine off his shoulder calmly. You think your money makes you a man? The father stepped closer to Sterling, invading his personal space. I look at you, and I don't see a powerful man. I see a scared little boy who needs to hurt people to feel big. Sterling's face turned a deep shade of purple. You listen to me, you peasant. No. You listen, the father interrupted, his voice rising, echoing off the walls. I work 14 hours a day. I ride a bike in the rain to feed my daughter. I have holes in my shoes, but I sleep soundly at night, because I know I never took food out of a child's mouth. I never humiliated someone just to get a laugh. He pointed at the twins. These are children. They are hungry. And you have everything. But you are so empty inside that you have to steal their dignity to fill yourself up. I pity you. Truly. The diners gasped. No one spoke to Mr. Sterling like that. Sterling was shaking with rage. He slammed the wine bottle onto the table, shattering it. Shards of glass flew everywhere. Security! Sterling screamed, his voice cracking. Get this filth out of here and take these rats with him if I see them in my city again. I'll have them arrested. The manager and 2 large security guards rushed over. They grabbed the father by the arms, twisting them behind his back. Daddy, Katie cried, clutching his leg. Get off him, Leo and Sam shouted, trying to push the guards away. But they were easily shoved aside. Throw them in the alley, Sterling commanded, pointing at the door. And call the police. Tell them he assaulted me. The father struggled, but he was exhausted. He was weak from hunger. The guards dragged him toward the door. He looked back at his daughter, his heart shattering. He had promised her a perfect birthday. Instead, he had given her trauma. I'm sorry, Katie, he whispered. Just as the guards were about to shove him through the doors, a sound pierced the chaos. It wasn't a shout. It was the sound of a cane striking the floor. Thud, thud, thud. But it was the rhythm of authority. The double doors swung open, not pushed by the guards, but by men in dark sunglasses and earpieces. A gust of wind blew into the restaurant, followed by a figure that made the air in the room change. He was an elderly man, perhaps in his 70s. He wore a long beige trench coat that was soaked with rain. His hair was silver, his beard neatly trimmed. He didn't look angry. He looked dangerous. Behind him stood 4 more bodyguards. And behind them, visible through the glass, was a convoy of black limousines blocking the street. The manager froze. His face went from red to a ghostly white. Mr. Vance, the manager stammered. The name rippled through the room like a shockwave. Arthur Vance, the billionaire industrialist, the owner of the Vance Group, the man who owned the building they were standing in, the man who owned the bank that held Sterling's loans. Arthur Vance didn't look at the manager. He didn't look at Sterling. His eyes scanned the room with eagle-like precision until they landed on the 2 boys in the oversized hoodies. Grandpa, Leo, and Sam shouted in unison. The twins ran across the room, dodging the frozen security guards, and buried their faces in the old man's coat. Grandpa, we were so scared, Sam sobbed. We got lost. The driver went the wrong way, and we got out to find you, and then the rain started too. Arthur Vance dropped his cane. He fell to his knees, ignoring his bad joints, and wrapped his arms around the boys. He hugged them with a ferocity that silenced the room. I know, Arthur whispered, his voice trembling. I've been tracking your watches. I was 5 minutes away. I'm here now. You're safe. He stood up slowly, helped by a bodyguard. He checked the boys over. Are you hurt? Did anyone touch you? Leo wiped his nose on his sleeve. Arthur Vance turned his attention to the manager. The man was shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. "You," Arthur said. "You are the captain of this ship. You let a passenger abuse children because he had a bigger wallet. You have no backbone." "Oh, I was just following protocol." "You're fired," Arthur said simply. "Get out." The manager hung his head and walked away, shame burning his face. Finally, the room was clear of the toxicity. Arthur Vance took a deep breath and walked over to the father. The father was checking on Katie, wiping her tears. He looked up as the billionaire approached. He didn't know what to say. He felt small in his stained shirt. Arthur Vance extended a hand. It was a weathered hand, strong and warm. "Sir," Arthur said, "I don't know your name." "It's John," the father said, shaking the hand. "John," Arthur nodded. "You have done something today that no amount of money can buy. You protected my blood. You fed my grandsons when you had nothing for yourself." "I just did what was right," John said quietly. "They were hungry. Many people saw they were hungry." Arthur looked around the room at the other diners, who now looked down at their plates in shame. "But only you acted. You have a warrior's heart." "John," Arthur looked at the delivery uniform John had left on the chair. "You work in logistics." "I'm a courier." "Yes, for a food app." "Do you like it?" John hesitated. "I'd do it for her." He looked at Katie. "But I used to manage a warehouse before the company folded. I know supply chains. I know how to move things." Arthur smiled, a genuine crinkling of the eyes. "My company, Vance Logistics, moves food and medicine across 3 continents. My director of operations for the East Coast just retired. I've been looking for someone who isn't just good at math, but who understands people. Someone who understands that every box we move matters to someone." Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out a gold-embossed card. He handed it to John. "The job is yours. Starting salary is $150,000 a year. Full medical, company car, and an education fund for this little lady." John stared at the card. The numbers swam in his vision. $150,000. That was more than he would make in 5 years of cycling. It meant a new apartment. It meant new clothes. It meant no more hunger. "Sir, John choked up. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the wine stain on his shirt. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Arthur said softly. "Yes," John whispered. "Yes." Arthur turned to the kitchen staff who were peeking out. "Well, what are you waiting for? It's a birthday party. Bring everything. The lobster, the steak, the biggest cake you have, and put it on my tab." The restaurant erupted into applause. Not polite clapping, but real, thunderous applause. The rest of the night was a blur of joy. The twins and Katie played together, laughing as if they had been friends for years. John sat with Arthur, sharing a bottle of unspilled wine, talking about the future. As they left the restaurant hours later, the rain had stopped. The air was crisp and clean. A black limousine waited at the curb. "We'll give you a ride home," Arthur insisted. John picked up Katie. She was fast asleep in his arms, clutching a leftover piece of birthday cake. He sat in the soft leather seat of the car, watching the city lights glide by. He looked at his reflection in the window. He was still the same man who had entered the restaurant hours ago. He still had the stained shirt. He still had the tired eyes. But as he looked down at his daughter, sleeping peacefully, he knew everything had changed. He had walked into the storm with nothing but his integrity, and because he refused to compromise it, the storm had finally cleared. The moral. The true test of a person's character isn't how they act when they are watching the world, but how they act when they think the world isn't watching. Kindness is a currency that never devalues. When you give your last slice to someone in need, the universe has a way of baking you a whole new pie.